Abyssal Murmurs. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next horror stories. Story 1 followed us home. Note, not my story. Written from the author's perspective. It's been quite a while since I've posted last, as I like to space out the events to keep my stories fairly interesting. All was quiet for a while, until activity started up again in the recent months. Though, that is a story for another time. Firstly, I'd like to direct everyone to what happened in the last remaining months of 2014. My father was moving out of his 19-year home sometime in September. It was the only home I had known my father to live in since infancy, so it was a little bittersweet to see him bade it farewell. The house had always felt darks to me, just like a nesting ground or bundle of negative energy, and everyone who frequented there always commented on the fact they felt like they were being watched, or, better yet, observed. The house just had that kind of energy that made you not want to stay there for long periods of time. There had been a few minor incidents that occurred here and there, such as footsteps, lights turning on and off, and things going missing, but nothing that really suggested a bad presence. I presume my father had helped to harbor and fuel this negative energy over the years, as he himself, unfortunately, is a negative and unhappy man. Also, my brother, whom tried to create and use a Ouija board in the house. According to him, it was unsuccessful, but he did not properly close the session before throwing the homemade board out. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was busy helping pack boxes and put them in the trailer with my two friends. We'll call them Mike and Tina for privacy reasons. It was one of the final days of shifting, and everyone was tired and grumpy and wanting to hurry up and finish so we could all go home. Mike and I were out in the garage, clearing out a few boxes, when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up and I broke out in goosebumps. This is generally my telltale sign that we have presence with us. Mike is extremely gifted in the spiritual aspect, more so than myself. So I kept my thoughts to myself to see if he too could pick up on this energy, and that he did. Mike then pulled me off to the side to discuss what he was seeing and feeling. "What's up?" I asked him. "There's something in your dad's garage. It's a dark mass, and it feels really bad. It's been following me the entire day, and I think it doesn't like me or the fact I'm here." Well, that certainly shocked me. I had only felt its uncomfortable presence sporadically throughout the day, prominently in the garage. I, of course, look to where he's pointing at the time, and only see the woodshed out the back of my dad's garage. I tell him to tell the thing it's not welcome here, and to cast it away in the name of Jesus, or to surround himself in white light if he felt threatened and carried on with packing. Fast forward a few hours. Mike, Tina, and I are being driven home for the night. Mike and Tina are staying the night at my house, so we first stop off at Tina's so she can grab some clothes and toiletries. Mike keeps looking out the back window of our car the entire journey back, and I can't shake the feeling of being watched, like someone's eyes are burning into the back of my head. I shrug it off to being spooked about what Mike told me. We arrive home and are all ushered inside by Mike. At this point, I felt the need to run inside. It felt like something was chasing and snapping at our heels, but I still didn't tell Mike or Tina because I'm naturally quite a paranoid person and thought I had just gotten myself worked up. We get inside and go about our business of unpacking and getting ready for bed as it was late at night. We bid my mom good night and all sit down in my room to chat before bed. Mike at this point hasn't said much, but this isn't unusual for him. It's then he drops the bombshell and the puzzle pieces start to fall in place. "Guys, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I think we were followed home by that black, creepy mass. Oh, crap. That explains the feeling of being watched and general edginess. Tina is visibly frightened as I blurt out what I had been feeling the entire night. He says he can feel it at the front door, trying to get in. I didn't know why it couldn't get in, but I was praying to all that was holy that it stay that way. We all huddle on my bed, and each start reciting various protective prayers. As we have different religious backgrounds and feel comfortable with different things. I tell the thing it's not welcome here, and I rebuke it in the name of Jesus Christ. Mike then tells me he can feel the thing laughing. Tina and I, of course, heard nothing as she is not spiritually gifted, and this thing seemed completely in tune with Mike. While I admit I was scared while saying this, I was shocked and even more frightened to learn it didn't work. An hour had passed, and the thing was still here. According to Mike, it also tried getting in through the roof and was getting angry at its failed attempts. Now, he may have been lying, but my dog also started to growl and bark at the roof precisely when he said this, and we also heard what sounded like dull thuds on the rooftop. Never in my life had I felt more like a caged animal. At some point, Mike says he feels like it is a female presence, and that she followed us because Mike could see her. Eventually, Mike prays in his native tongue and calls upon his guardian angel, and the presence leaves us. The creepy hair on end at the back of your necks feeling disappeared, and Mike told us he could no longer feel the presence. Now, could Mike have made all this up to scare us? That could be true, but I had never told Mike of the dark feeling in my dad's house, nor the feeling of being watched. This was his first and last time visiting the place. My dog also reacted in sync to what Mike was saying as to where this presence was. I, too, got feelings of unease and being watched that matched up to Mike's account. The thing that really makes this all fall in place was the next morning we tell my mom what happened, and she looks at us with a gobsmacked expression and says, "I blessed the house yesterday. I don't know what told me to, but something did." Could this have all been a coincidence? I personally don't believe in such a thing, but each to their own. Whatever the thing was, it never returned again. Mind you, I wasn't exactly keeping an eye out for it either. My question is, why was the thing not sent away when we prayed and rebuked it? This has a LW. A wise worked for me in the past. Also, has anyone else had similar experiences? Story 2, Midnight Encounter. My older brother had always gotten sat on by ghosts. They had stopped when he got older, but because he's tough, who really knows? Maybe he just doesn't tell us anymore. Anyways, we were moving to a new house. To help us get comfortable, help move things, and to sweep our house and the cleansing stuff, my grandma, who is a shaman, came to sleep over one night. We all slept in the living room, which had a bed and a couple of sofas. Not all our beds and stuff were here, so we just all slept in one area. My brother chose to sleep on the bed right under a window, which he left half open. We left a small lamp on and a couple plug-in night lights. I am a very deep and bad sleeper, but for some reason, I had this nagging and shaking feeling. Somehow, my vision in my blank dreams were shaking, and I felt like fingers were gripped my shoulders and shook me. I woke up right away, and I looked around. I saw my grandma already sitting up. She took one look at me, shook her head, and put a finger to her mouth, signaling me to be quiet. Then she pointed her finger to where my brother was sleeping. She just looked at me, and we both had an unspoken agreement. We carefully and quietly, as we could, got out from under our blankets and made our way to my brother. I was about 4 feet away from my brother, when my grandma held out her hand for me to stop while she went ahead, walking so damn slowly to my brother, but stopping at the edge of the bed where his feet popped out. She crouched really low by the side of the bed, hiding herself. The bed was 2 feet tall. I stood as still and quietly as I could and crouched down a bit too, enough to see my brother's face still, and looked on ahead. I saw my brother then start to shake slowly and then violently in the dim lighting. His head was turning left and right, over and over. His skin turned pale, and then a light shade of blue. Then I heard a whistling sound from far away that made me look up to the window my brother slept under. There, I saw a transparent but clear enough pot Taksu climbing over the window. Her face was blue and cracked, rotting with blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. One of her eyeballs was popped out and hung down by her cheek, swaying with her movements. She had a long blue tongue with holes in it, and long, messed up black hair fell to her waist. She wore very simple clothes, a black shirt with blue outlining black pants, a red sash, and shay around her waist that for some reason looked very new and almost shiny. She had one leg over the window and into the house, and was about to fully crawl over when my grandma finally jumped up from her hiding spot, yelled something, and grabbed my brother. I then immediately heard a cry that sounded like a mix of a cat and baby scream/cry from far away. Then the Podge and Tuksug all of a sudden disappeared in front of my eyes. Right when she disappeared, my brother woke up with a huge gasp, as if he just came out of water from swimming and holding his breath so long. He immediately jumped out of bed, wrapped his arms around my grandma, and cried so hard with tears streaming down his face. Through his sobs and tears, he tried to tell my grandma what happened and thanked her that he came to save her because he was calling out to someone, anyone, to come save him. After she calmed him down and assured him that everything was okay, she did her shaman stuff. She sprayed breast milk, tied a string on him, circled the bed with her sword, then marked all the doors and the spot under the window and other windows with the sword, and we all settled down. Before I was about to fall asleep again, I had to ask my grandma. She's a light sleeper, so I knew she could hear me. I asked her in Hung, "Grandma, why was I able to see the Pojanksu? And why, when I heard whistling and the cry, it sounded like it was so far away, but the Poje Tuksug was right there?" She responded back in Hmong, "I'll tell you a different time when you're older." But it sounded far away when it was near is just that. That's how they work. Usually, when you hear it near you, it means the Poj, Tuksug, or ghost is coming to you but isn't near yet. When you hear it far away, it is already close to you. Story 3. Vulnerable state. My mom has been sick for many weeks now. She had been into the emergency room 3 times, all within a month. I have been her main caretaker since her illness. Out of nowhere, my aunt and her husband came to visit us due to my mother's serious illness. We were all grateful and glad they came, since we have all missed each other very much, and it was nice to have another set of hands to help. Due to my vulnerability, there were also others who came to visit. Second night into my aunt and uncle's visit, they decided to sleep downstairs since upstairs was too hot. The next night, they decided to sleep downstairs again. They slept in the family room while I slept in my room, and my children slept in theirs. We always keep our doors open with a middle hallway light on when we sleep. In the middle of the night, my son crawled into bed with me saying he had a bad dream. I was tired and nodded. It was okay for him to sleep with me, leaving his sibling alone in their room. Around 2, I somehow woke up with a cold shiver. I grabbed my blanket to cover my son and I. Just within a few minutes of trying to fall back asleep, I saw something white from head to toe entering my room, walking towards the other side of my room. I thought and felt like it was my uncle. It tried to take the form of my uncle, but then again, this entity was all white, white as snow. It just kept staring at my son and me. My son slept the closest to it, and I was at the other end of the bed, furthest from it. I felt like I was able to read the entity's thoughts. It seems like it wanted to lay in the bed with me, but my son slept in its spot. So, it just stood there for a good 5 minutes until my son moved. I moved too, and it just vanished. I excused it and told myself it was nothing, and I was just thinking too much, therefore seeing too much. I tried to fall asleep again, since it was only around 2 a.m. Few minutes into trying to fall asleep, I clearly heard a voice at the stairway calling my name. It sounded like my brother's voice.
He usually gets my attention by calling me from the stairway instead of coming downstairs.
I heard my name being called 3 more times before I opened my eyes. I slept in bed with my eyes wide open, thinking I shouldn't answer until I hear it again clearly. And long behold, I didn't hear it again. I knew it couldn't have been my brother, because I'm sure he was still asleep. He usually wakes up around 7:45 a.m. to get ready for work, and never wakes up any earlier. Normally, in our household, I'm the only one who wakes up early in the morning because I work really early and have to drive a little further than I would prefer to work. So, my body has adapted to waking up around 4 or 5 in the morning. Even though I was on leave to stay home to take care of my mother, I still woke up early. So, I just excused this incident too and went back to sleep. When I woke up at around 3, I went to use the restroom upstairs and noticed a 2-inch open wound scratch on my forehead. I just excused it, telling myself it was my son who probably moved too much during the night and accidentally scratched me. On the way back, I checked up on my mother and brother. They were both asleep. I knew it couldn't have been my brother who called out my name. That morning, I asked my aunt, who is a die-hard Christian, to help bless our house and briefly told her my experiences. After we blessed the house, we had lunch, and at the lunch table, I asked my brother if he had called my name at the stairway. He responded no, and proceeded to ask why. I didn't have the heart to tell him, because I knew he would have been afraid. I didn't want to scare my family, because I knew they would be terrified. I was always the one who was spiritually stronger than anyone else in the family, so I had to be tough and let it go, especially when we just moved into this house and my mother will be home alone moving forward because my youngest will start school this upcoming year. It has always been said that when you are at the most vulnerable state, entities prey on you. I was at my most vulnerable state as I had a lot of stressors. My mother was in and out of the hospital without diagnosis. I had to take time off from work for about a month, mainly without pay. Had a mortgage to worry about along with other bills. Trying to get accepted into an education program. Plans of going out of state for my brother's wedding. My children with their schooling and everything else in life. Let's all remember at our weakest point. Let's not allow these entities to get to us. We should always have our guard up, even though our spiritual guard is vulnerable. Story 4. I'm from Jamaica, by the way. When I was younger, my mom used to move a lot. We moved into this house that the house owner's mother died there. Anyways, when we move in a couple weeks later, nothing abnormal happened until a couple of weeks in. My mom once told me that she saw 2 cats at her bedroom door, a man cat and a lady cat. Sometimes, it felt like someone was watching every step that you made, and it was creepy. My mom and my brother usually leave the house before me. Every time I got ready for school, I always felt like something was watching me. The house was always cold. There were bugs, lizards, and rat bats living in the house before we moved in. One night, my older brother came to visit. He wasn't the spiritual type. He believes that ghosts doesn't exist, etc. We had to share a room because it was only a 2-bedroom home. About 11:00, my brother was on his phone talking until about 11:30 when he went to bed. Everything was quiet until I heard my mother speaking in tongues. That's what we Jamaicans call speaking to spirits. I woke up but didn't go out to look. Now my bedroom didn't have any door at the moment, so I had to use a curtain. After a while, my mom stopped. About a couple minutes later, I felt when something pulled me towards the edge of the bed by my feet. I didn't move the rest of the night. I slept in the same position that the thing left me at until morning. The next morning, my bigger brother told me that he felt strange that night. After that, my mom moved the bed from near the doorway and against the wall towards her bedroom. Story 5. Natchez, Mississippi. This was when I first started working on a cruise ship. Little details about the job and my position. We are actually a pretty small cruise compared to like Carnival. The maximum passengers we hold up to is 150, at least on this vessel. Unlike other cruise ships, a majority of our passengers or guests are the elderly, old, or retired folks. Our theme differs depending on which ship/river we cruise on and is usually historical, since we visit historical sightings like a slave camp, Lewis and Clark Journey. My job, I'm a deckhand. I take care of the vessel/assist with driving/security. It was night, and we were in Natchez, Mississippi. We had just arrived and finished mooring up. I was scheduled security duty since I worked a midnight to noon shift. As I did my usually rounds around the ship every time I stepped outside on every floor to inspect and make sure everything was okay, there was an uneasy feeling as if I was being followed or stared at. I'll also occasionally hear a lady weeping, as if she was distressed. But it wasn't exactly like it sounded coming from within the ship, but more like somewhere around the ship, around the river or so. During the time, I didn't pay much attention to it since I was dead tired. The last location for my rounds is the pilot house, where the ship navigation controls are at. As I finished my rounds and sat inside because it was my job, keep an eye on the radar for severe weather and water levels. It had been about a good few minutes, then suddenly somebody radioed us. It wasn't clear on what was said since all I heard was static. I thought maybe they were out of range. So bad connection, or they were passing another ship, and we all happened to be on same channel. It kept happening again and again, but as it occurred more, the duration of the static increased. Then finally, a lady voice got through. She kept saying, "Help, it's cold," and cried of distress. I was scared as hell. I didn't radio back. 1, I was scared as hell, and 2, I'm not authorized to radio anyone outside unless underway, or it's the Coast Guard. As I went on to continue my hourly rounds, I wasn't sure if I heard it again, or it just kept replaying in my head, but I kept hearing the cry and her saying it's cold. I sat inside the pilot house until sunrise. Occasionally, the radio would go off again, but it was just static noise.
I was still a bit on edge and freaked out.
Once my captain woke up, I asked him if by chance he knew of any female captains around the Mississippi River, since he worked his whole life on this part of the river, basically knowing every ship and captain. He said, no, on the Mississippi River. They're only male captains since most of the ship tends to be barges and transport goods only, and it would be very rare to see a woman captain. I told him about what happened, And next week, when we arrived back in the Natchez, this time we moored up at least 10-15 miles further out from where we were last time. I was curious as to why, because mooring up was a bitch, since I had dragged a 200-foot of heavy line through the river, through the mud, and tied it around cemented block and tree. The captain told me that recently, a body was found around in this part of river and wanted to avoid it and keep it away from passengers and other crew members. Story 6. Hot Spot. It's been couple years since I fished. This year, with a new job and new hours, means more time to fish again. A longtime friend named Keith and I had planned to go to a hot spot that we in the past had always gotten 5-10 lbs basses. We left early that morning and got to the boat launch around 5 am. If you look at the sky, you can see the sun rising far east, a little streak of the sun ray hitting the tops of the trees. The morning fog was still very thick. I stepped outside to guide my friend as he reversed the truck to put the boat into the water. I walked over to the trailer pulley, and I felt something had just touched me on my shoulder. I turned around and didn't see anything. I released the boat into the water and tied the boat to the dock. I then signaled my friend to pull the trailer out of the water. My friend quickly drove the car and parked the truck and the trailer in the nearest parking slot. The river was very foggy as we got the last couple of our fishing equipment onto the boat. As we left the boat launcher area, I noticed a person by the dock. I asked my friend if he saw that person. He said no. I said to myself, I might be seeing things, and to just ignored it. 10 minutes passed, and we finally reached the hot spot. The birds were chirping, and the crickets were singing loudly. We started to cast. First cast landed a 6 lb smallmouth bass. My friend landed a 4 lb smallmouth bass. As we were continuously for 15 minutes or so. After that 15 minutes or so, we cast several times, and there was no luck. We decided to continue downriver to the mouth of the lake and the river. My friend was in the back of me and he tumbled down for no reason. He grabbed onto me and looked a little freaked out. I asked him what's wrong, and he said that he felt like someone had pushed him. My friend got up and said he might be thinking too much, and we continue fishing. We continued downriver to the mouth of the lake and the river. My friend anchored the boat immediately so we won't drift into the lake. We cast a few more times and still no luck. From the east eye of the lake, the sun was coming up slowly. The fog was lifting slowly as well. I looked and cast towards where the drop-off of the mouth of the lake. I felt a very strong tugged, and I knew I had caught a huge one. My fishing line pulled out like crazy. In a couple minutes into the fight, the fish finally died down, and I was able to reel in the fish. As soon as I reached out to grab the fish, I saw an ugly, rotten head, where the skin was wrinkled like it's been in the water for days. The eyes opened and I fell back and yelled, "Kov Naim es." My $400 rod and baitcaster fell into the water. My friend looked at me all spooked out, and he ran to the steering wheel. I got up and tried to retrieve the anchor but could not pull it out. I ran to my bag and took out my fillet knife. I cut the rope that was tied to the anchor, and my friend started the engine. We came straight back to the boat launch. I ran back to the truck, and we loaded the boat as fast as we could. By that time, the fog had lifted. The sun was out. There was no one there except us. I also noticed that there was no birds chirping or crickets singing any longer. I just had a gut feeling that we needed to get out of that place as soon as possible. We loaded everything and drove off. I looked in the rear-view mirror and saw a person just staring at us. Story 7. The Tickling Game. When my parents got married, my dad was a soldier in the Vietnam War. so he was away from home a lot. As expected of a Hmong wife, Mom lived and farmed with Dad's family. Dad's older brother and sister-in-law had an autistic son, Pao, who doesn't know how to talk or walk properly. So even though he's around 7 or 8 years old, he still crawls. Mom adores the boy and gives him the attention that his parents never gave him, so he was very attached to her. One of the games they would play is the tickling game, where you'd put your finger on your lips and blubber. Then take that finger while still blubbering your lips and tickle the other person. I'm sure you guys have done this with your little ones to show affection or make them laugh. Most days, some of the family members will go to the garden while my mom or grandparents stayed home to watch Peo tend to the animals and housework. But the weeds were growing faster than they could manage to clear, so Aunt and Uncle decided that they need every able person in the family to go and help for 1 or 2 days. They didn't want to bring Pao along, because he would need a lot of attention and distract them from all the work that needed to be done. They are already behind schedule. It was a cold morning, so my aunt and uncle tied a rope from one of his foot to the middle post of the house, next to the stove that was still burning with firewood to keep him warm. He cried and wanted to go along with everyone too. He was able to free himself and crawled after them, but they brought him back and tied his foot to the post again. So he finally curled up into a ball and lay there by the burning stove. Anyway, it started the house on fire while the whole family was still at the garden. A neighbor had to run to the garden to fetch them. My aunt, uncle, and grandparents all rushed home. My mom and the other children had to gather their belongings before leaving the garden. When they got to the edge of the village, they can see a dark cloud of smoke in the sky coming from the direction of where they lived. As they got closer, they can see that all the villagers were still trying to help put out the fire. Pao, foot still tied to the middle post of the house, laid there, charred black by the time they finally put out the fire. My mom could not bear to look at him after my aunt and grandma put his funeral clothes on him. He smelled of rot and burned skin, blood oozing out of his body. She had never in her life seen a dead, burned person before. So terrified, she didn't go say goodbye to him or see him at the casket during the whole funeral. But when they took his body to go and bury, while they walked out the door, my mom happened to be in the way, so she stepped aside and caught a glimpse of him. She thought she saw him, opened his eyes, and smiled at her. Soon after the burial, while my mom slept in the middle of the night in her dream/wake state, she would have the creepiest experience of her life. A no-face creature with arms and legs out like a spider would crawl on 4s from the ground and onto the wall closest to my mom. Then it would sit on her chest and pin her down. Then it would take its finger and tickle her while blubbering its lips. It didn't always come, but some nights it would come. It followed her throughout for years, throughout the war, haunting her at night. She told my grandparents, aunt and uncle, and even my dad, but no one believed her. They thought that she was just imagining things and shocked by the terrible death of her beloved nephew. My mom told my dad that the creature would always play the tickling game that she played with Pao. She believes it's him. Finally, my dad asked a great shaman to look into it, and the shaman told him that it is indeed Pao. He was so attached to my mom because he sees her as someone who loved him like a son. He was sad that she didn't try to stop everyone from leaving him at home that day. That's why even after he died, he kept coming back to play the tickling game with her. The shaman did a big ceremonial ritual to cut his path and send him off so that he would not be able to find his way back to her and play the tickling game to her. And to this day, she still regrets not standing up for him and being too obedient of a Hmong Nayab. I hope you guys enjoy this story. Good night. Story 8. Merst, Sia, the Haunted House. In 2013, my family and I moved into an old house in the countryside of Merst, California. Before we moved in, the previous owner told us that their grandpa died in the house, and even showed us the room that he died in. But they assured us that everything was okay and that they had not experienced anything since his passing. Going by their word, my parents willingly rented the house for our family. The house was old, but sat on an acre of land which made it perfect for my parents to start their farming business. One of the reasons why my parents wanted the house. When we first moved in, my parents agreed to take the room where the grandpa died in and let me and my siblings sleep in the other rooms. However, that didn't work out because my father was a shaman and would always see things and get paranoid. So he refused to sleep in the room that the grandpa died in. My older sister and I were brave enough to take over that room and told my parents that they could take the master bedroom instead. A little detail about the room. The room where the grandpa died in wasn't by the other bedrooms. It was located at the end of the house / opposite end from all the other bedrooms. To get there from the other bedrooms, you had to walk past the living room, dining room, and kitchen. Across the room was a bathroom, and next to it, the door which led to the garage. The first few weeks in the house was quiet and peaceful. We didn't experience anything, and were having the best time of our life. It wasn't long after, until things began to make a turn. My sister's boyfriend was visiting her for the weekend and would spend the nights at our house. My sister and I would sleep in the living room and allow him to sleep in our room. He only slept one night in our room when he asked if he could sleep in the living room instead the next day. My sister agreed. So she and I went back to sleep and in our room the next day while he slept in the living room. A few weeks later, my sister finally asked him why he wanted to sleep in the living room instead. He finally told her and admitted that he saw something in the room that night and didn't want to tell us because he didn't want us to be scared. He told us that as he was sleeping, he heard something rocking the bed and looked up to see what it was. He looked at the mirror that hung straight across the bed and saw what looked like a boy or a man rocking the bed. He was too afraid to run out the room and also didn't want to frighten us, so he decided to stay in the room until morning. Soon after, my mother and father started seeing things. One night around 8 p.m., after my father had just finished feeding the chickens, he decided to relax out in the patio on a bed he placed there. He was starting to fall asleep when he heard a voice talking to him in Hmong. "Look, their grandma is right there." He quickly got up and looked over at his chicken coops. There, he saw a figure by the entrance. The chickens seemed frightened, also were flying around like crazy, making lots of noise. My father got scared and went inside. He told my mom about it the next day. One of my mother's favorite hobby back then was making packaged fresh, sticky rice and meat for the Hung stores. It was a casual morning for my mom as she got up around 4 or 5 a.m. to begin prepping. She was going on with her normal routine and began marinating the meat. She was facing my bedroom, the haunted room door, as she was working. She then heard someone running from my door to the bathroom door. She ignored it because she thought it was just me or my sister who needed to use the bathroom. Then she heard it again and looked up and saw a little girl/boy running from the bathroom back to my room. She knew it wasn't human because it looked like a Pojin Tuksug and ran faster than a human kid. And we had no kids sleeping over that day also. Following that, my father began having nightmares. He would always wake my mom up in the middle of the night and tell her that he was scared. My father told us that one time, he woke up in the middle of the night and saw a man and a lady in the closet dressed up in dead clothes. After that, he would always leave the lights on and refuse to turn them off when he goes to sleep. As time went on, my sisters began experiencing things. My sister, who slept the room next door to my parents, let's call her Pa, started getting sleep paralysis. One night, I was sleeping alone in my room because my sister's boyfriend visited again, so they slept in the living room watching movies that night. It was around 1 a.m. when Pa ran to my room and begged me to go sleep with her. She looked so scared and tears were streaming down her face. I was too tired, so I just kept questioning why she wanted me to sleep with her, but she was too scared to tell me. My sister and her boyfriend were still up watching movies when they heard Pa crying and came to check. Pa finally told us that she got sat on, but didn't tell us the full story. We all walked her over to my parents' room, and my mom opened the door. Pa was still crying and told my mom that she heard someone walking to her door. Then it opened her door when she finally saw it. It was a black figure, which looked like a man slowly walking over to her, and before she knew it, she couldn't move. The figure was sitting on her and whispered something to her ear in Hmong. "Don't think I will ever leave you alone." Pa refused to sleep in her room for a few weeks and slept with my parents. My dad also made her put on a hum rattle, tuxiab neeb, around her neck, which he made and hung a foot of a crow, red strings, and other stuff believed to scare away spirits on it. My sister, who slept with me, started getting sleep paralysis. She would tell me that she would get sat on every now and then with me sleeping next to her. She would try waking me up and try calling me, but wasn't able to move. One evening, as she was taking a nap alone in the room, she heard something walk over to her, crawl on the bed, sleep next to her, and put its arms on her. She then heard it whisper the name of her friend that recently passed away. My mom was starting to get worried about everything, so she asked one of our aunts to come do jingle bells. After my aunt finished, she told us that there are spirits in our house that refuse to leave. One, including the grandpa that died in my room. Also, for my sisters, their friend who recently passed away has been visiting them for some time. We burnt some paper money for all the spirits, wishing for them to leave us alone. A few months passed. The owner told us that he was going to sell the house and asked if we wanted to buy it. My mom refused to, because of all the experiences we had there, so we moved out. We didn't know how many people died in that house, but we're sure there was more than just the grandpa that died in the room. We also don't know who bought the house, but what I'm curious about is if they're also experienced things. I consider myself a lucky one, because I never experienced anything in that house. Although, to this day, I still have dreams about that house all the time. I mean, unpleasant dreams. And whenever someone speaks of that house, or the experiences there, it still gives me chills. Story 9. Peek a book. Okay, so this encounter of mine is scary, but short. This encounter is about my sister-in-law's oldest sister, who was murdered 2 weeks before this. I was at my brother's house. Let's call him Leng, name change for safety. I was babysitting my nephews while Leng and his wife were out. It was around 9 a.m. I was in the bathroom putting on makeup, and I heard my nephew knocking on the door. I opened and he comes in smiling. I went on with my business, but all of a sudden I felt like there was someone behind me. I looked into the mirror, but still nothing. I ignored it. I put my makeup bag on top of the toilet. Then I heard my nephew playing peekaboo. I turn around, and there he was playing with someone behind the shower curtains. I felt chills go down my spine. I quietly said, "Baby, who's that?" My nephew looks at me, smiling, and pointed at the tub. No one was there, and I was getting ready to run, but I heard a bang by the toilet. I turned to look, and somehow my makeup bag fell into the garbage can. I was at the max of spooked, so I ran and forgot my nephew. 2 seconds later, my brother Leng and his wife got back and asked me what was wrong. I told them, and my sister-in-law said, my sister used to play that with him. Maybe it was her. Story 10. Kavminiam ties. I'm only on my phone writing this, so please excuse my grammatical errors. Long story. My grandma from my mom's side was diagnosed with cancer, and the doctors said that she had less than 6 months to live. Knowing that there's nothing left the doctor could do, my grandma told her Nayab that she does not want to trouble any of us, and the following day she decided to leave. August 21, 2012. R.I.P. Grandma. We love and miss you dearly. The funeral was decided to be held the week after my grandma's death, because it was held on the first week of college, and my dad's chicken that no one can watch over. My 3 brothers and I couldn't leave on Thursday with the rest of my family to Sacramento. We're from Oroville, so we had to stay home until Saturday morning to be able to leave. When I got home from school that Friday night, the first day of the funeral started. I was really tired, so I took a nap. Around 8 p.m., I woke up from hearing my little brother yelling and cussing over whoever was on the phone with him. He said it seemed like someone kept trying to prank us. Again, the phone rang this time, so I decided to pick it up. I didn't say anything and listened carefully. It sounded like the sound of a fast-forward cassette. Then, I heard my mom's voice in the background with many people around her, so I'm guessing it was from the funeral since she's there. I kept calling Mom. Mom, is that you? She couldn't hear me, so I clicked. The phone rang again, and I picked up and heard the same thing again. Again, my mom couldn't hear me, so I clicked and called her back. I asked her if she had called the house phone on accident, but she said no. I told her to double-check. Maybe she had butt-dialed the house phone without knowing it, but she checked and there was no call. I shrugged it off, but the phone kept on ringing and no one was on the other line. I got annoyed. I unplugged the phone. Around 10 p.m. when I was in my younger sister's room all by myself upstairs, I heard a distant infant baby cry. I thought that was so weird because on my block, you will never hear a baby cry. It kept going on for a while. Then I heard it. My grandma's sick and weak voice said, "Va as, va." I got so creeped out and chills ran through me. I yelled out, "Miam tes yogas tias yo koje sees tex hob loswali koji. Tag kiskav mam li tuaje saib koje." Grandma, if that's you, don't do that. I'll come visit you tomorrow. I ran as fast as I could to the living room and saw my younger brother sitting on the sofa, so I told him what I heard. I called my dad and told him what happened. He said, "Don't be scared. It's probably because all my sisters were there except for me, so my grandma probably didn't see me and missed me, so she came." He told me if it happened again, then yell at my grandma that it's not right for her to keep doing that and scaring her grandchildren. My parents told us to keep the light in the upstairs hallway on, so we did. Stupid me slept by myself because I usually just shrugged things off. When I closed my eyes and opened them again, I saw that the lights were turned off. If someone came to turn it off, I would have heard it since our house floors are made out of wood. Again, trying to stay positive, I thought maybe my brother came to turn it off. Trying to sleep in my quiet room, every 5-10 minutes I kept hearing a big stomp on the floor. Okay, now I'm creeped out, so I grabbed my blanket and pillow, ran downstairs, and slept in my brother's room with them. Their room was so uncomfortable after an hour. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go back to my room. I called my boyfriend and knocked out on the phone with him. That was the end of my encounter with my grandma. Now, the second day of the funeral, my clueless sisters kept taking pictures of herself. And she caught a white sleeve on the wall behind her, just like the one my grandma was wearing. My grandparents are Christian, so my grandma wasn't dressed in hung clothes. Instead, she wore this white robe-looking thing. Eek, how to describe it. Lol. My sister got creeped out, showed it to my mom, and my mom told her to delete it. That's all we have experienced during the funeral. My sister told me that sometimes before she sleeps, she will pray for my grandma. I thought she was ridiculous sometimes because we were shaman. Lol. Anyway, she said that she dreamed about my grandma quite often. For example, in one of her dreams, she was getting raped, but my grandma came in and helped her. This other time, after my parents argued, she had a dream that my grandma came and took my mom with her because my dad didn't love her. Now my mom just told me a couple days ago that my auntie kept seeing my grandma in her house. My grandma will come in and say she's hungry, walk to the kitchen, and disappear. Sometimes, at the corner of my auntie's eyes, she will see my grandma with her children. My mom said that because my grandparents have converted to Christianity when my grandma died. They wouldn't allow them to take the cow and give it in front of my grandma's body. I'm not so sure, kind of confused. I know that when we die, we are to be sacrificed with a new J to take it with us and travel back, go where we came from. Anyhow, because that wasn't allowed, my grandma is hungry, so that's why she keeps going to my auntie's house. We live in Oroville, so it's quite hard to visit my grandma's gravestone in Sacramento. Since my mom will always cry at every visit, we only visit my grandma once a month and bring food. Story 11. This is a true incident that was told to me by my father. It happened back in 1992. My mom just got home after giving birth to me. My dad took care of all the household chores, as my mom was very weak. I was a week old. My mom's health began to worsen with time, and it made my dad worried. He consulted a lot of doctors who deemed it was normal because my mom was anemic. They prescribed a lot of medicines, but nothing seemed to work. One day, early in the morning, my dad got up to go to the bathroom. When he was coming back to the room, he heard someone grunt. He thought my mom was probably sleep-talking and didn't pay any attention to it. The grunt continued, and then he heard me crying. He rushed to the room, only to be filled with terror. What he saw was my mom laying in bed with her hands, legs, and head bending outwards, kind of like Emily in the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose and Me, crying uncontrollably. He froze on the spot, but soon he recovered, picked me up and ran out to call the neighbors for help. We didn't have telephones back in 1992. When the neighbors came, they saw my mom lying there. She had passed out. My father narrated everything to our neighbors, who then unveiled the story behind this terrifying incident. Before us, a family used to live in that house, a guy, his wife, and his mother. The guy and his mother were really abusive, and they tortured her whenever they pleased. The wife soon became pregnant, but the family accused her of carrying someone else's child. She denied it and protested against the accusation laid on her. This made her husband and her mother-in-law furious, and they killed her in a fit of rage. They dumped her body somewhere and ran away. The neighbors concluded that my mom must be possessed by the woman's spirit. My dad was a non-believer of anything supernatural, so he dismissed everything they said. But they insisted on calling a tantric just to be sure. Couple of days later, the tantric came. As soon as he entered the house, my mom started acting weird, sneering and hissing at him. At that, he dug an iron nail in the bed near her, and she backed away. He then started ordering the entity inside my mom to get out. At first, she refused, but then the tantric threw some powder at her, causing her to scream in pain. The tantric ordered her to get out again and to tell him where she was buried. Reluctantly, she did, and left my mom's body. My mom passed out again. After all this, the tantric went to the place where she was buried with my dad and our neighbor and burnt her remains. He advised my dad to keep a knife or an iron nail under my mom's pillow, just to make sure nothing happens to her. When my dad inquired about why this happened to her, he said because the lady was pregnant and she was murdered with the child in that house. She wanted a baby, and as there was a newborn baby, me, in the house, that triggered her to possess my mom. Eventually, she would have killed me and my mom. After this incident, we left that house and never even went near it. My mom never even knew what happened to her. So, my dad decided to never talk regarding this incident. Story 12. My mother. This isn't my story, but it's a long story, so get ready to read. When I was only a few years old, my parents never got along. I was their third child and the youngest at the time. When my parents first got married, they loved each other a lot. They were the most lovely married couple you've ever seen. A few years after they had me, my dad started going out with his friends, late drinking with them. It was only my mom who took care of me at home while my siblings went to school. Whenever he returned home, my mom would argue and fight with him. At first, it didn't seem too bad, but as time went by, my dad got more violent. He started hitting her and pushing her around sometimes. He would even threaten to kill her. Every day, I had to suffer seeing my mom cry her eyes out. Her life was so miserable and sad. One rainy night, she made me a plate of rice and boiled pork. As she told me, I'm gonna go into the basement to do some laundry. Don't follow me. I still remember how dead and lifeless she looked that time before leaving me behind. It felt like hours went by, and she never came back. I made my way into the dark basement to see if she was done. I walked to the laundry room and saw my mom hanging there with some rope attached to her neck. I walked over to her and tapped on her leg. "Mommy, what are you doing?" "I'm done with my food," I said to her, but she wasn't moving. Her body was slowly swinging around. Her eyes were open, and her mouth was slightly open. She also had a bad smell coming from her. I had no idea what she was doing, so I just stayed with her for what felt like an hour before I took another look at her and realized her eyes were slowly turning towards me as her mouth formed a grin. She looked so weird and different. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell ring as I ran upstairs to open the door for my siblings. I told them that Mom is being weird in the basement as my older brother made his way into the basement. I was still talking to my sister when we heard a terrified scream from downstairs. It was my brother's scream. We both rushed down as he yelled to call the cops and burst out crying. My sister immediately grabbed her phone and dialed 911. My brother and sister were crying in front of my mom. I was confused about why they were reacting that way. I still remember what my brother was saying. "Mom, why would you do this? Do you not love us?" About 30 minutes later, sirens were heard as there were about 2 to 3 policemen entering our house. They covered my eyes and took me upstairs. Sometime later, they took down my mom's body and took me and my siblings away. After everything was over, they took me to an adoption center, and I was adopted by some foster parents. I was separated from my siblings. As for my dad, I don't really know what happened to him, but I heard he went to prison. My foster parents took good care of me, but I really miss my mom. One day, I remembered I was playing with toys with their son, and I accidentally broke one of the toys. He cried as the foster parents came to comfort him. They didn't blame me, but I felt a little sad for the boy. At first, my foster parents loved me and took good care of me, but they started being mean to me, not liking me since I wasn't truly their son. There was a time I accidentally broke one of their favorite plates while eating, and the father started yelling at me, which made me cry a lot. I ran into the storage room and cried to myself in the dark as I thought about my mom. I couldn't fall asleep. I kept crying while it was already late. I felt a hand on my shoulder as I turned to look, and it was my mom. I hugged her tightly. She wasn't the same anymore, but I didn't care. No matter how scary or weird she looked, she is still my mother, and the only thing I could think about at the time was her. I was too young to even realize what she was. Some nights, I would see her appearing in front of my eyes while everyone was already sleeping. She holds onto my hands and brings me food. She never really said anything to me, though. She was very quiet, and I couldn't even see her face since her hair was a mess. I told my foster parents that my mom would be taking care of me when they're all asleep, but they thought I was just a child, so it's normal for me to behave this way. They started to not really love me as much, but still keep me around since they know I will be able to help them once I grow up more. For some reason, their kids had stopped playing with me. He seemed scared and creeped out every time he saw me. It's almost like there was something scary around me that he sees. As I started to grow older and older, my foster parents grew more distant from me. Even their kids didn't really like me as much. We go to the same school, but they don't even want to claim that we were living together. My foster parents were being mean to me, which made me cry a lot, to the point where they just had me eat somewhere else every time it was lunch. One night, I heard my foster mom screaming from her room like she was terrified of something. I tried to listen, but all I could hear was talking about something. They seemed scared. I really don't know why, but this family seems to be afraid of me lately, almost like I'm a ghost. My mom had also stopped visiting me ever since I turned 9 years old. I really miss her, and whenever I mention her to my foster parents, they just look at each other. I also don't know what happened, but they started being nice to me again, out of the ordinary. As I reached my teen era, life got a lot worse for me. I had no parents to show me affection, no one to teach me things. I wasn't happy the way I was. One day, I even thought about ending my life. I walked to a nearby bridge as I looked down into the creek below before looking up into the sky. Tears filled my eyes as I thought about all of the things that happened in my life. I miss you so much, Mom. Where are you? Why did you have to leave this world without me? Do you know how lonely I am without you? No one loves me. I don't want to live anymore, I thought to myself before attempting to jump down. But just then, I felt a hand grab mine as I glanced at the person, and it was her. My mom was standing next to me as she smiled at me. She looked like an angel. She then pulled me back into a hug. I cried to her. It wasn't long before someone saw me and came to rescue me from attempting suicide. Many years later, I graduated from high school and moved out to live with the friends that I made from high school. We also went to college together and earned our degrees. I was able to find a good job for myself, and my life was moving forward. I also went back to visit my foster parents, as they were getting old now, maybe in their 70-80s now. They were much different from before. They were nice to me, and even apologized for being how they were before. They also revealed to me that when I still lived with them as a kid, I was too young at the time, so I didn't know, but since they kept being mean to me. My mom would show up and haunt them. She would constantly show up in their dreams and told them that if they don't love me, she will give them a reality check, something like that. Some nights, they wake up and see me standing at their doorway, looking at them, possessed, or some nights they'll hear me walking around laughing and giggling. They wanted to put me up for adoption again, but they were too scared of my mom. They even tried to fetch a shaman, but it didn't work. One night, my foster mom woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and as she sat down on the toilet, she felt someone grabbing her feet as she looked and saw a Hmong lady with long hair covering her face, also in Hmong clothes, crouching down beside her. She screamed and ran out of the bathroom. She told me all of the scary things that happened to her and her husband, as we all laughed and joked about it. I was shocked to hear all of this, but I was also very happy that my mom defended me so much, and I never knew. Ever since I left them, my mom never appeared again. She had also stopped showing up for me. I guess since now I'm living a better life, her job is done. I'm happy for everything that she's done for me. The reason why I'm alive today is because of her. As for my siblings, I got in contact with them again, since I did a lot of research on social media and found them. They're also living a happy life as well. Already married. They're already ahead of me. It's time for me to step up to the next chapter of my life and see where it'll take me. Story 13. My family had 2 tragedies in the same year. My dad's favorite cousin passed away from a heart attack while he was driving. After I heard about it, we went to go fold papers and help decorate the funeral. When I came home, I felt someone's presence in a corner just staring at me. To me, I saw a black, big cloud of shadow, but the light was bright enough that there was nothing there. It was weird, because we had the home thing that hangs on the wall to keep spirits away. It felt like my dad's cousin was trying to attack me, but he wouldn't do that to me because I barely knew him that well. I told my dad about it, and he told me that it was nothing, just a spirit coming inside the house. When my grandpa passed away, we had to sleep in the funeral home in MN, in the small room for his funeral. I don't know why we had to sleep there, and I also don't know a lot of shaman culture, so I'm assuming it was the rule for shaman funerals. I was charging my phone, and the light was on. I was facing to the wall. All of my family were sleeping and was also facing towards the wall. All of a sudden, someone was tugging on my blanket, and I turned around to see who was tugging the blanket, but there was no body. My family wasn't moving around. I shrugged it off and was thinking about positive things. After I went back to my phone, I heard a little girl giggling right by my ear. I turned around and saw no one. I literally got freaked out and hid under my blanket and fell asleep. After we buried my grandpa, my family went to go my dad's oldest brother's house to grab a few things and eat. Before we went into the house, you had to wash your hands and put it over a fire. After everyone went home, most of us became sick. My parents said it. My older cousin who spread the sickness around because she was sick before she came to the funeral. But she made sure she wasn't near any babies and us. My family had a gathering for a holiday. I don't remember which one, but I think it was Christmas. My uncle said that he heard the little girl giggle in his ear at the funeral. I told him that I heard her too. Then we started talking about how it was super weird that we all got sick at the same time and on the same day. This year, we moved into a bigger house, and my grandma was living with us because my parents needed help around the house because I had started working, and also to help out with my new baby sister. One day, I came home from school to the smell of a rotten chicken or something. When my mom left for work, she saw the dead bird hanging at our front door. The bird was strangled by a fishing line that was in the gutter, but it was more weird was how the F did the fishing line get up there? My grandma had to cut it off and blessed our house and did a huplet. A week later. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel to achieve 1,000 subscriptions.